Well, howdy, everyone. Welcome to the live stream. I'm your host, Pete Bickford. I'm the creator of ComicBase, and you're at the ComicBase live stream. If you meant to go to the market manipulation seminar, that's in the chat room down the hall. Anyway, hi everyone. If you don't mind, go ahead and check in the chat over there, and please say hi. And if you have not done so before, please like and subscribe the chat. It does help get the messages out to people who are being notified that the thing is going on. I've been assured by people who know more about this stuff than me that it does wonders. So go ahead and mash that like and subscribe button. We'll take it from there. Okay. All right, so let me go ahead and hide some windows here so I don't get distracted by seeing lots of different images of my own face on the screen, because, who wants that? Jeez. Hope everyone's doing well. It was unseasonably warm out here in Franklin, Tennessee. We were promised 39 degrees and wintry mix, as they call it, in the weather today. Instead, we got 66 degrees outside, and it was just lovely. I hated to come inside, and as much fun as it is to chat with y'all, I hated to just be out, from the sun, because it's the first time in ages that, you could actually enjoy it. So anyway, hope you all doing well. What we're going to be doing today is a little bit of news, and then I want to talk about update stuff. It's a little bit, I'm trying to avoid the Grim Reaper aspect of the whole thing, but I do need to deliver some news about, like, guys, some stuff is really, it's about time to move on from it, and I hope I don't get too dark about the whole thing, but we'll take it from there. Anyway, so let me just make sure that my chat is working here. I got the keying on. Excellent. 44 and sunny in Vancouver, Washington. Nice. And let's see here. Rob says hi. Sweet. And a mix of sun and clouds. Nuisance snow overnight. Yeah, nothing like that nuisance snow. By the way, got a note from Andre. Says, the first release of the comic cover catalog is here. I can't put it on his Dropbox because it's 8 gig and is likely to get much bigger. That's going to be really cool to see. Andre, I'm like... let's chat later on. Maybe there's some way we can help you out. We have access to space, and maybe there's something we can do to host that or do something for you. But let's talk later on offline. Anyway, on the news front, like seconds before the update, I posted before the live stream, I posted an update to ComicBase. I don't even know the version of it right now. Let me go and look at my own thing here and find out what the version is. So if you go to comicbase.com, as I'm going to do right now, I'm going to mix over here to the screen. If you look up here at the top right, it'll tell you not just what version we're officially on, 21.0.1, but the latest interim build, 21.0.1. Build 1533. What is so wonderful about build 1533, you ask? This is one of those things that me, and I don't know how many of you folks do labeling for a living, or at least that when you get your comics, you always stick ID labels on them. But if you do, this is probably going to be like your favorite build ever, because what we're doing in this build is we made it so that when you are scanning books into the database and you're adding by barcode, it is no longer going to show you the list. If you say, show me the comics I just added, that list is no longer going to be just in alphabetical order and sorted by issue number. It's going to be in the order that you just scanned them. Why do I care? That actually sounds a little bit less convenient, because if you then print those labels, they're going to come off your printer in the order that they were scanned, which means if I had a big pile of comic books in front of me, as I've had to do for most weeks of my life, and I beep them all in, I put them down next to me as I'm going, I will have formed up a pile. The pile will now be in the order that the labels come off my printer, so that when I go to label them, I no longer need to match them up. I can just go label, 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 and it gets much, much faster. I estimate it's going to save me about 10 minutes a week every time I do comic books. That's 45 minutes back in my month. I will take the time. Thank you. And maybe your mileage may vary. If you run a comic store, this is probably going to be the best thing ever. But anyway, that's a new thing. It's amazing in a database how hard it is to get things to happen in what appears to be an unsorted order. It turns out you're always sorted by something, and to make that happen, it was actually slightly tricky. But we did make it happen, and so if you have build 1533, that is the new behavior, and we hope you enjoy it. So anyway, thank you for that. All right, let me just do a quick check of the chat before we get into the meat of the thing. Let's see here. Winchell's going to Nick. You are sorry. John just said wind chills getting to -40, and that would be very cool. Yes, yes. -40. Holy crap, John! Where are you at in the world? Is that up in northern Minnesota or Canada, or where are you at? Because that sounds like Minneapolis to me. That sounds absolutely miserable. Sorry about that. Stay inside. Light a fire, have a glass of scotch, and enjoy the evening. Play some board games. I don't know. Anyway, okay. So as I'm searching around for things to talk about on these live streams, I tend to go by what things that people have been asking me about all week. And what people have been asking me about all week, this week, for whatever reason, is either I have a really, really old computer and it's got 2 gigs of RAM and a 1.4 gigahertz processor, and it's really miserable and I need something better. Or they've just bought ComicBase and they want to move stuff onto a new machine and they want to know how to do it. Mixed in with a little bit of, I have to kind of tell you guys some stuff is going to come to an end and I need y'all to move on because you can't support the old stuff forever. So let's talk just a minute about the whole idea of forced upgrades. So look, I mean, there is a conspiracy version of the whole thing. It's like say, oh yeah, Detroit back in the 50s, they would put tail fins on stuff. So if you had the car that didn't have the tail fins, you suddenly felt uncool, and now you can't be seen in public, so you had to buy a new car with tail fins. It's, that's a theory. I've never really bought into that theory. But man, when computers came out, upgrades are something that was absolutely part of the gig. It used to be, for most of my life, the reason you would upgrade your computer is because every 3 years you could buy a computer that was the same price, that was twice as fast, twice as much RAM, and you could just do way more stuff. That was, basically the physicalization of a thing called Moore's Law, named after a early chip scientist at Intel, where he basically predicted that every couple of years or every 18 months the number of transistors on a computer would double. And that held sway for a surprisingly long amount of time. I want to say the better part of 30 years. Now, of late, computers have been held up, ever since really the mid-late 90s, they've been hitting what's called a thermal limit, where you can cram more stuff into the same space on a computer chip, but you can't run it as fast, and you start running into a problem where it builds so much heat, it stops functioning unless you have very elaborate cooling to keep it cool. And so the real game in chip design over the last probably 25 years has really been around how do you get the most performance per power cycle out of things. Basically, without ramping up how much heat and power you're throwing through the chip, how can you still get a lot of performance out of it? And so instead of things doubling every 18 months, they've been, it goes up by 25, 30%. It's nice to have, but it's not what it was. So you're upgrading computers these days, not so much because the new one is going to be like 10 times faster than your old one. You're doing it because stuff is just starting to break. And one of the things that's behind stuff's just starting to break is because when you buy a computer, you're not just buying a machine. You're buying a whole ecosystem of software. And the most fundamental thing is in that ecosystem of software is the operating system. Now, for all y'all, it's all about Windows, because we are Windows software at this point. Unfortunately, we don't have a Mac OS X version of ComicBase, and so Windows is really going to be the gating factor. If the version of ComicBase if the version of Windows that's on your computer isn't supported by Microsoft anymore, it's no longer supported by us either. The reason is, Microsoft has made a long-standing practice of putting out a version of Windows, supporting it for about 5 years as they call it standard support, and then you get a couple more years as extended support for corporate customers who bought 30,000 machines and don't want to upgrade them all at once, or they might have software that they've built in-house that would be really, really costly for them to upgrade, so that you can buy additional support through the back door through Microsoft. But there comes a time when Microsoft is no longer going to release patches and security things for your machine, and that anything that you're still using on that operating system is suddenly going to be in a really bad place. With the internet, when that got to be a big deal, the biggest reason that you care about keeping your software up to date in terms of your operating system has been security, frankly, because hackers are very, very clever. Windows is a very, very big program, and there's a lot of things that go along with Windows. Everything from device drivers, and people have found a way to hack memory. Just memory controllers have been hacked. Network controllers have been hacked. The TCP/IP protocol itself has been hacked. It's amazing how many ways, if you're really, really clever, you can insert bad code or code that makes a computer do things it shouldn't into the whole scheme. So it's critical that companies like Microsoft and Apple are always releasing patches to, as soon as someone's figured out some devious way to get in and cause mayhem on your machine, that you can plug up that hole. And ever since everything's now connected to the internet, you're always under attack all the time. I mean, you would not believe, we will stand up a new mail server at the offices here, like a brand new machine. We don't tell anyone where it is at all. It literally, we install Windows on it, we install the mail server software on it, we give it an IP address, we turn it on, and within 10-15 minutes, we can look at our our firewall's logs, and we can see people doing a thing called port scanning, where they're literally going to every IP address on the internet and just saying, oh, IP address number blah, 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 blah just came up on the internet. Let's see what ports he's got open, and then that's used as stage one for an attack to say, oh, he's got this port open. Let's go ahead and see if we can, get some well-known exploits going that will start taking over that machine. So, I mean, that literally, last time we stood up a mail server, within 15 minutes, it was under attack. It's amazing how nasty the place is. And you don't know about most of it because most of the time your Windows, there's many layers of security that are happening with Windows and your network and everything else. And most of the time it just bats them away like a bunch of buzzing gnats. But the gnats never go away. Anyway, when the hackers come up with a really clever exploit, and there are some very famous ones that, again, like Heartbleed and whatever else, that will interrupt things like the firmware on the chips that run the computers themselves. I mean, it's crazy how deep some of these exploits can go. When they do that, you need to have Microsoft releasing patches. So when they say that they're no longer releasing a support for a given operating system, you're in trouble. My advice at that point becomes, anything you love better not be on that machine anymore, because and your machine frankly shouldn't be on the network anymore, because it could be used as a weapon against all your other machines at that point. So now this is relevant at this point. A lot of us, for instance, really loved Windows 7. It was the first version of Windows that a lot of us didn't actively hate if we came from other operating systems. Windows 7 has been end-of-lifed a couple of years ago now. So there are well-known exploits for Windows 7. If you are still running Windows 7 on any of your machines, there are things that 13-year-old kids in Bangalore can download from hackers' websites that, if they knew your IP address, would allow them to just take over the damn thing. And if some 13-year-old bored kid in Bangalore can take over your machine, you don't want anything you love on that machine. And that's because Windows 7 is no longer supported. Windows 8 and 8.1 also, 8.1 lost support in 2018, and I was actually surprised because before I went on the air today, I wanted to know what's the status of support for these different things. And Windows 10, the earliest versions of Windows 10 are no longer supported. So if you have Windows 10 version, I believe 1019, or it might be 1091, but it basically, I'm sorry, 1901, I'm reversing it. The 19 stands for the year. It's only 2 years old, but that one is already not being supported under conventional support by Microsoft. So if you are still running an older version of Windows 10 and you haven't updated the security on it, you are potentially in trouble from attacks at this point. So yeah, Windows, you got to keep it updated, and if you have a machine that's running anything older, honestly, stop the stream now, go out, find yourself a later version of Windows, get it installed on it, because you are doing yourself no favors. I don't care if it's your oldest, most loved and trusted laptop, you've got to get a modern operating system on at this point, or you're just asking for trouble. Unless this is like a machine that literally never hits the internet, at which point, how useful is that machine? But that's the number one, is you got to get the operating system updated. Now, if you got your operating system updated, if in terms of memory and things like that, no computer that I would have ever let anyone I love buy in the last 10 years has had anything less than 4 gigs of RAM on it. I don't care if it's my parents who just want to surf the net. That thing is going to have 4 gigs of RAM on it, which means it better have had a 64-bit version of the operating system on it. Now, if you just do the numbers, so what is all this 64, 32, what's all this stuff mean? Well, all right, so when you're describing how big a number you want to describe, when you're just talking about the memory on a computer, so if let's think of it as a building, right? If your building is 4 stories tall, right, you can describe how tall that building is with 3 bits, right? A bit is 1 binary digit. So the first bit gets you from between 0 and 1. The second bit gets you all the way up to 0, 1, and then you use the second bit to get you up to 3. So if you start counting from 0, I guess that gets you 4. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. The second bit after that, it's all powers of 2, gets you to 8. The next bit after that gets you to 16, so forth. Well, if you multiply it all out and you go to and use a 32 bits to represent a location in memory, which you need to do because that tells you, if you have more memory than you can actually say where you want to go, then you're not using that memory. Basically, it's like the floors on the building where the elevator doesn't go there. So if I could have a building that's a jillion stories tall, but if the elevator stops at the 8th floor, no one's going to go to any of those other floors. And that's how the memory on your computer is. If you have memory physically installed in your computer that goes beyond 4 gigabits, which is the biggest number you can represent using 2 to the 32nd power, or 2 to the 31st power, which is a 32-bit computer. Anything over 4 gigabits, it literally can't reference. And so if you have a computer like that, you'll see that you have 16 gigs installed. Your motherboard will know that has 16 gigs installed, but it'll say that there's only 3.75 gigs of it in use, or something like that. At which point you've just wasted all the rest of your RAM. Because it can never be used. Your computer's operating system will never reach that far. The elevator doesn't go to that floor. So if you're using anything modern these days, honestly, you should be using a 64-bit operating system. There's no excuse for anything other than that. And as a result, for the first time ever, on this last version of ComicBase, there are certain things in ComicBase that just don't work. Like the notable one is the screensaver in the Archive Edition. We didn't release a 32-bit version of that. Because there's no point. If you have something that's capable of running in the Archive Edition, you almost by definition have a machine that ought to have a 64-bit operating system on it. And so that is when you're going out to buy your next copy of Windows. If you have that copy of Windows 7 out there, and you need to upgrade it, make sure you're installing the 64-bit version of Windows onto your 4 gig or better computer, because otherwise you're just wasting your time, and you're going to start seeing that more and more things become not compatible with anymore. All right, let me do a quick check of the chat before we go into other things. Let's see here. You gained that from us. You're welcome. Negative 40 outside. Oh my God. Let's see here. It's the most secure computer that still functions as my Mac Centris. I had a Centris once upon a time, and I do believe that's still, I want to say 1992. I'm getting the year about right there, Greg. But yes, that's the whole trick is you don't have any way of connecting it to the network. I want to say in 1992 there might have been dial-up. But yeah, I gotta tell you, one problem about as the talking heads would say, your lifetime piling up, which is, as other people would say, just getting older, is if you've been doing the same thing for a lot of years, you don't have these easy reference points of saying, all right, let's see, when I had a Centris, and you picture where you were using that Centris, and it's like, oh, that was in my old house in California. I was in the upstairs office. And then you realize, well, I've had that upstairs office in California for like 12 years. So which of those 12 years was it? And so without a secondary time reference point, it gets harder to peg out exactly where you were in the timeline. But anyway, all right. Let's see here. Death Race. Oh, okay. Greg says yes. Anyone read Backtrack like Death Race 2000 through time travel? No. That's interesting. New comic or anyway? It sounds interesting. Audio too low on his end. How is the audio for everyone else? The levels looked a tad low, but I will go. Is this a little bit better? Sorry about that. Also, I've been standing back from the microphone a little bit for no apparent reason. Let me just hit the focus one more time. Hopefully that makes everything a little bit sharper. Okay, cool. All right. So back to the more or less the plot here. So number one, guys, if you're running anything less than Windows 10, get Windows 10. So it's, again, most important thing you can be doing, period. stuff is just not going to run. If it does run, it's not going to be secure. Just stop everything, get Windows 10. If you're running 32-bit, it better be on no RAM. And honestly, if you're running with that little RAM, you're probably not even on a machine that's capable of running ComicBase. So enjoy your 2 GB laptop, but honestly, get a 64-bit version of the operating system. Windows, in general, if you have a legitimate license to install any version of Windows on your particular machine, they don't charge a separate fee for the 64-bit version license. So whatever you installed, you're typically allowed to install the 64-bit version of it. Do that. You ought to be running a 64-bit operating system on a current machine. All right, beyond that, if you're running an old version of Windows 10, make sure you're going to Windows Updates. So let's flip over here, and I'm going to go here to, and this is going to appear on the wrong, no it didn't, Windows Update. All right, you guys have all seen this before. And let me make sure it goes on the right setting. Windows Update, so the default settings are going to be that it updates automatically at a given time. Let it do the default thing. That's going to keep you up to date, and every so often, it's going Windows, usually about once a quarter, once a half, they're going to do a big update. And they'll typically, because it's such a big amount of foo to put out over the internet, they kind of stagger that. So, even if you know that Windows, 1921 H2, I think they're usually on the halves. Now, even if you know that that exists, you don't necessarily get it right away. So your buddy might have it before you do. Don't worry about it. It'll show up, for your machine in the next couple weeks. And typically, you can afford to wait for those things. But when those things happen, you'll typically see a notice saying, "Hey, it's time to upgrade. You do a big thing. We'll try to restart your machine outside of business hours." Do that. Go around to all the rest of your machines, make sure they're updated as well. It's a good thing. And like I said, I was shocked to know that at this point there are actually whole versions of Windows that I still consider pretty modern that aren't supported anymore. So make sure that's done. All right, so beyond that, let's talk about stuff that's gonna go away. So I've already told you, so the operating system is where it all starts. Well, actually, your machine's where it all starts. But for the operating system is the next thing. When Windows says, look, we're not going to support, say, Windows 7 anymore, that's the point where you'll see ComicBase'S, we don't support Windows 7 anymore. You might still be able to install ComicBase on Windows 7, but I wouldn't suggest it. So if you're getting a note like that, if you're looking at the system requirements with ComicBase, if we say, look, it requires this version or better, do yourself a favor. It's a really strong hint that your best bet isn't to call our support and say, hey guys, I want to install this on my Windows 7, can I? It might work. It might still function, but you're not doing yourself any favors in the long run. That is really, at that point, you're like 10 years out from the release date of your operating system. Do yourself a favor and handle that first before you worry about updating ComicBase. Now, with that said, and here I'm probably just burying the whole lead on the whole thing, there are times when we're doing heavy lifting when we need to say, look, we can't do the old thing anymore. And the biggest one for us has been going forward. We spent like 4 years switching from the Microsoft Jet or Access based database that was in ComicBase 2017 and earlier. That was, all the way back to about 1996, I want to say, is when we first started using that database. It had a 2 GB file size limit, and that was the one that if you still remember it, it because you were constantly having to compact in order to get ComicBase to stay under that 2 GB size limit as you were using the program. Once we went to SQLite, which is what we released with ComicBase 2020, that was no longer a limit. Now, we still had to roll support for ComicBase 2017 into ComicBase because we're going to constantly have customers who are upgrading from old versions of ComicBase, and we need to be able to pull your data into the new thing, at which point we hope to God you never have to use the old database engine again, because, well, let's face it, by the time we were done with it, we were beating that thing like a rented mule. It was really, we were pushing that thing well past its sell-by date. It was like, I used to have a Ford Escape, which before I blew out an engine cylinder, and it had like 230,000 miles on it. And yeah, that was nothing compared to what we did to the Microsoft Jet database engine with the sheer amount of data that we put through it. So if you're still using ComicBase 2017 or earlier, For God's sake, honestly, I almost don't even care if you buy Comic Base Express or if you've got Comic Base free. Get the current version. You're not doing yourselves any favor sticking with an old version of Comic Base. I mean, I get, you know, it's like, hey, it works. It you know, it does what I need it to do. You know, I don't like change. Whatever your reasons are, it's you know, it's, if you possibly, you know, are still active using, you know, comic books at all, do yourself a favor and get updated to the current version of Comic Base. Now, the way you do that, our whole model with Comic Base has always been, once you're in the club, we try to make it so that the new version of Comic Base comes pretty cheaply. Typically, it's around you know, if you bought our more upper end versions of Comic Base, buying the upgrade is usually about a third of what it costs you to buy the program to start with. Now, if you bought our lower end versions, it's a little more there's kind of like a minimum price of like $50, because it's kind of like what it takes to keep the lights on around here and just keep you guys updated with data all the time. But yeah, for as little as $50, you can get the current version of Comic Base. It'll come with a year of content subscription, which will keep your prices updated. But it's gonna get more important, and without being, you know, being too dramatic about the whole thing, there is going to come a time on our end where, in order to move forward, we got to start shedding some of the baggage of supporting these old platforms. And the one that really has the most writing on the wall for it right now is, it's a technology called ADO.net. It's the interface layer we use to talk to any database, in particular to talk to the old Microsoft Jet database engine that we used to talk to for the Comic Base 2017 databases that people still have. There's things we do both in Comic Base to convert things over. At some point, we'll probably do a standalone converter program that will be the one thing that we ever do that, you know, still bundles, you know, that forward. And that program's whole purpose will be to convert your old database to the new format. And then ADO will probably fall away from being part of Comic Base itself. At which point, speaking of 64-bit, it opens the world, you know, the way for us to move Comic Base to be a full 64-bit application, which means we can use more memory and do, you know, more things faster with Comic Base. But honestly, as much as anything, it simplifies our life if we no longer need to write a lot of database routines twice. So, for instance, I spent a lot of quality time with the debugger up until about 2 this morning, going through our reporting program, Jimmy. So, when you save a database to the web, or you say, I want to have this report saved up to the web, we have on our server a program called Jimmy. It has a little icon. It looks like Jimmy Olsen, you know, the you know, Superman's pal, the, you know, boy reporter at the Daily Planet. And his job is to open up that database and generate certain reports for you, so that when you go and you view them on the mobile app, or you view them using your web browser or whatever else, you've got your reports ready for you. Well, to do that, Jimmy has to be able to open up databases of all kinds, chew through them, do a lot of heavy lifting, and you know, and crank out reports and other functions. Jimmy also updates your stats in the mobile app, so when you're seeing how your collection has changed in value, he handles that. He interfaces with the online saved backups you do through Sidekick and so forth. Well, one problem I've got right now is, I'm trying to give Jimmy some new superpowers, right? I'm trying to get Jimmy to do a lot of really cool new stuff, right? And I'm asking myself, wow, I'm writing hundreds and hundreds of lines of code every time I sit down, and it's going to turn into thousands, maybe tens of thousands of lines of code by the time the adventure's all done. Do you think I want to do this twice? Once for, you know, the technology we're doing for the last 3 years, and once for the technology that's 4 or more years older, which more people aren't using? The answer is hell no. Of course I don't. Matter of fact, some of the things that use the older technology, they just don't work. One of the advantages, if you're a programmer, of using newer tech is because that's what Microsoft, all their people are using, and so they tend to write stuff that makes your life as a programmer much easier. For instance, for me to just convert all the data in, say, your books file and load it into a different database. It used to be, what I'd have to do is I'd have to sift through the whole thing, I'd have to sort it, I'd have to go line by line through the whole thing, write it out to a text file in a very careful format, and then I'd have to, you know, fire off a query on the server side of thing, which then opens up that text file, reads it, deals with all the problems if anything is malformatted, or it doesn't read right, or the internet connection gets, you know, disrupted, or any of the millions of things that can go wrong. Processes the whole thing, integrates in the table, flushes the log, lather, rinse, and repeat, right? Turns out I can do the whole thing in about 20 lines of code now, using the new techniques available to me. Now, as a programmer with a lot of stuff on my plate, do you think I'd rather do it with the 20 lines of code that every programmer at Microsoft who works in that neck of the field has already been through and already debugged and already validated? Or do I want to write hundreds and hundreds of lines of code that now I need to debug and validate? Well, of course it's the first answer. So selfishly or not, the answer is, in order for us to go forward and build new cool stuff into the program, because there's a limited amount of time and space in the whole thing, there's a part where we have to kind of draw a line and say, look, we'll do it for the new stuff. We're not going to do it for the old stuff. And so if you're running an old ComicBase 2015 or ComicBase 2017 database, or God help me, a ComicBase 11 database, and you do a save to web, there's going to come a time where you say, yeah, that's going to not work anymore. We're going to need you to update. You know, I don't like that. I mean, it'd be nice if everything were free. I could keep that going, but I mean, best case is I keep the old thing running in a separate process someplace, and it soldiers on bravely for a while with nobody watching it, and I write a second copy that does the new thing using the new things. But at some point, you also want to just say, I'm sorry, we want to cut down the amount of space that we're trying to keep, the number of plates we're trying to keep spinning in the air, and you got to say, look, those ones we're not going to do anymore. And so if you are using ComicBase 2017 or earlier, please, I'm begging you now. And again, I don't even care if you're using ComicBase free. Get the current version of ComicBase free. Or if you're using ComicBase Express or Pro or Archive, get yourself upgraded. You're doing yourself a favor on any number of levels. And at some point, I'm not saying when, but at some point, I'm going to have to make some hard decisions, and some support for some of the old stuff is going to need to start dropping away. Or at the very least, you definitely won't get the new things. So if we offer new features on the website that might do new integrations or things like that, you won't be eligible for any of that stuff if you're still using the old stuff. Because I can't write the stuff 2 and 3 times, especially if the old way is much harder than writing it the new way. All right, that's one thing. Let me do a quick check of the chat here because I've been yapping for a while. Let's see here. Oh my god, he's on PDX expecting slow. Yay. All right, Aura says, will there ever be 128-bit OS? I'm gonna say probably not. So 64 bits it gets you up to a really, really stupid number as far as how many, let's see, how much memory is 64 bits? I want to say it's in the petabytes. It's like one of those numbers that it's unfamiliar to us even how much you can so it's all right, so it's 2 to the 64th divided by blah 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 blah. I'm looking for 2 to the 64th bytes. It's exabytes of physical RAM. So honestly, I couldn't tell you off the top of my head what an exabyte is. I think it's more than a petabyte, certainly more than a terabyte or a megabyte or a gigabyte. I don't know. It's more memory than, I don't know. A certain way you can keep doubling, times factor 2 when you start talking about the number of atoms in the universe. So I'm going to say probably not 128-bit OSs anytime soon. Mike Beam says 1200 baud dial-up. Man, dude, for real, I was working with a guy, I'm not going to name his name there, but he was, I guess Verizon was having just a hellish time with his internet, and as a result, he was having a hellish time. He wasn't able to get connections to servers and so forth, and I'm trying to do a support session with him. I'm having a hellish time, because you can imagine how well this is all working. He was getting, I want to say something like 0.4 megabytes per second or something, but I did a little quick mental math on the whole thing, and he was getting internet speeds that were somewhere in between my 1990 modem and my 1992 modem. But we're talking like, this is before dial-up ended. These are the kind of speeds he was getting off of his internet provider. And he was supposed to be getting like 200 gigs up and down symmetrically, so I hope he got that worked out, because that was not a good time. Yes, dial-up went back to baud in 87 to 88. I remember my first modem I ever had was my first computer I ever had was an Apple II, that I had of my own was an Apple IIe. It was a 2E. Because I think there was 2 pluses, but I think I got my mom to spring for the Apple IIe, which notably had a shift key. Oh man, maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe it was a 2 plus. Gosh, Anyway, if my mom ever watches the stream, she can correct me. But I remember part of the deal was I would work all summer at her decoration business. She ran a mail order business, selling the kind of decoration kits that cafeterias and hospitals would put out during the holidays to kind of decorate for the seasons. That was her business back in the day, and I traded her a summer of work so that she would buy a 300 baud modem for me. And I consider that quite a good deal because that meant that I was on the cutting edge. I had a real speed advantage in gaming. Yes, there was gaming back then, even then, over those poor suckers with 110 baud modems that had to like dial the phone, listen for the skrrr, and then stick it in the acoustic coupler to let it go on. So, yeah, I was hot stuff back then. All right. Let's see. Show us how to check Windows bit and COMICBASE 30 Student 64. Excellent. Let's do that right now. So, if you go in Windows and you go down here, and I should be showing the screen, and you just type PC, and that'll take you to this PC. Now, if you right-click on him and choose Properties, that'll take you to the Windows Properties right here. And you should see, this is actually, they did a rev of this recently, so yours may look a little bit more old-fashioned than this one. Windows, the update they just pushed down the line, kind of converted this one so it looks a little more slick. But right here it will tell you, this is the OS you're running right there, and under System Type, it'll tell you the operating system right here. And so you want to say it's a 64-bit operating system running on a 64-base processor. If you got a 64-base processor, there is no godly way that you should be running anything less than a 64-bit operating system on it right now. I mean, when 64-bit processors were new in the 90s, there were some compatibility reasons you might want to run a 32-bit OS on it, but this hasn't been true for at least 25 years. So, and the reason I'm harping on this point is because we've dealt with multiple customers who somehow along the way got a hold of a 32-bit version of Windows on their 64-bit operating system, and they have not been having that much fun with it. So the answer to that is go ahead and upgrade. This, by the way, also tells you your installed RAM, which is very helpful to know. And if you had a 32-bit operating system, you'd see something like it's got 32 gigs of RAM installed, but only 3.75 gigs are in use. And so that would tell you that you're wasting a lot of time and money. By the way, down here, this tells you the build of Windows you're using. They're starting to try to give these a little bit. Oh, let's see if I can. Have I got the thing installed to make this go bigger? No, somehow I turned off my magnifier. I apologize for that. But they're starting to try to give these things a little bit more descriptive names. So they're calling this one 20H2. It stands for second half of 2020. If you follow the sort of stuff, you can also say, well, the particular build I'm on is 1904 2.804, which of course everyone's going to remember, especially because I've got the Windows Feature Experience Pack 120.2212.551.0. Forget about that. This is the number that matters right here, version 20H2. All right, so that is that question. All right, back to the chat. Let's see. And Aged Camp said, yes, better. I'm assuming that means the audio. The audio's been low for weeks. Okay, well, hopefully that fixed it. Audio better now? Can turn my speakers lower. Excellent. All right, I will try to keep it at the higher levels. We had, when I first got back from my vacation, something had happened with my sound system, so I went through a big recalibration on it, and I think I probably got very conservative on the audio levels. Let's see here. There's 300 Long Boss, only have 4 books graded in Nauru the day I did. It's like being married to Marilyn Monroe, but she has a chastity belt on. All right, excellent. All right, so let's see here. Wikipedia said Centrus came in '92. I win. Excellent. I was actually working for Apple at the time, so I had a little bit of an unfair advantage on knowing some of the history. All right. Why do people beat rented mules? Don't you have to put down a security deposit or something when you go to pick up the mule rental? I mean, the joke, of course, it's the same way as like no one ever washes or changes the oil on a rented car. It's like, you basically burn the thing for as much as it is, and when it comes back, if it's still breathing, you typically get your deposit on the mule back, I guess. All right. Update to 2021. Sidekick is having issues. We'll contact support. Yeah, if you have any issues with anything, let us know. One thing I'd say in general, if you're having issues with Sidekick, so one thing that changed, it's about the only thing of note that changed, is in COMICBASE 2020, Sidekick, you need to tell it what databases you want it to manage. It will do nothing unless you tell it what database you want to work with. The reason we changed that up was because when we first invented Sidekick, we would basically have it automatically manage any database that was in your recent databases list, because we thought, well, you know, if you open a new database, clearly you mean to work with it. Turned out that was a terrible idea, and some people would be futzing around with databases that were old backups or that weren't working right or whatever else, and then, you know, Sidekick back in the day would then, you know, studiously try to keep all these old and corrupted and worse copies of your databases up to date, and then you'd have all sorts of errors would pop up with that. And so we made the decision with COMICBASE 2020 that if you want Sidekick to do anything at all, you have to add it to the list of databases. So that is done. Let me go ahead and show you that. I'm going to pull up Sidekick here. I think I closed Sidekick right before the show because I was just doing a build. Excuse me a moment. All right, now let me pull up Sidekick. Where are you, babe? All right, here we are. All right, put it onto the monitor that you guys can see. Okay, so when you come up under here, I'm sorry, let me slow it up a little bit. So when you pull up Sidekick, and Sidekick is found down near the clock area, there's a little arrow pointing up, you know, there's a little superhero-looking dude. Right-click on him, choose Open, you'll see his interface. When you get there, click the gear at the upper right-hand corner, and it'll bring you to the Sidekick settings. And make sure under the General tab here, and right now it's in dark mode, which that's a thing Sidekick does these days. My machine's set to dark mode, so if yours isn't black, doesn't mean you have an old version, just means your computer isn't set to dark mode. But make sure you hit the plus icon over here, and that you add in the database you are most recently working with. You make sure that that's added to your databases. If you're doing some old database you weren't working with or something like that, then Sidekick will do nothing at all. If this database list is empty, then Sidekick just sits there because it's got nothing to do. If you launch him, he'll basically come straight to this dialog and say, you want to give me a database? Anyway, but go ahead and just add in just the databases you care about, and he'll take care of them for you. One thing to note, don't add your backups to that. So if you're choosing a database and it's copy of ComicBase or it's backup from whatever else, don't add it to Sidekick, because, you know, you could get Sidekick to update that. Sidekick will refuse to post sales from backups. There's a few things it won't do with backups because we don't want you doubling up your work. So in case you, for instance, had like I have Pete's comic inventory, if I had also added in backup of Pete's inventory, then it would be trying to post from both databases to my sales on Atomic Avenue, and my life would be a living hell. Because both your main computer, your main program, and your backup necessarily will have the same database ID. So as far as our servers are concerned, they're the same file. And so if you're posting from your backup and you're deducting your sales out of your backup, and then you go and you launch your regular one, it won't see the sales anymore. Your inventory will be screwed up, and your life will be a hell. So to stop that stuff from happening, we don't allow posting sales from backups. I think there's a few other restrictions as well. I'm not sure if we allow you to back up your backups online. We might have turned that off as well, because we saw an enormous amount of clutter on the back end of the servers where people essentially they're backing the wrong files up, and so we try to sort some of that out. Okay, let's see here. Give me a version of ComicBase on floppy disks. Yes, Greg, if you still have one of the ComicBase 1 through 1.2, you could still get it on floppy disk, and it came on 6 floppies. That I was the guy who would hand apply those labels myself very carefully. Let's see, quality time with the debugger. Yes, it was lots and lots of fun. I was up, like I say, me, glass of wine, and 2 in the morning. Good times. Change Sidekick to Jimmy. Well, I can't. Jimmy's a reporter. Sidekick is your pal who does all the scut work. Jimmy's busy reporting. All right. Agent DeCamp says, a true nerd, be happy to do that twice. Guys, I've written ComicBase at least 3 times in its entirety over in different languages. I don't want to do anything more times than I have to at this point. I have other things I want to do with life. Okay. Yes, supporting all that old tech is kind of Pete's beer time. Thank you, Gregory. You yes, less beer time equals more bad time. Thank you for putting it straight. Oro says, what happened to Control J field? It's a different way to do the same thing in ComicBase 2021. Yes, absolutely. Control J still works. If I'm in ComicBase and I hit Control J, hard to see, but my cursor just jumped up to the barcode field. And so if I beep in the comic book right now, it's going to take me straight to the comic book. Now, there was one additional feature of ComicBase with the Control J, is it would not only take you to, it would try to look at the barcodes being used and see if it was a short enough number, or if it looked like it might be an issue on the current screen. It would try to scroll you down to that issue. Honestly, the barcodes got a little ambiguous on that level, and it didn't always work. If you want that, so instead of that being a feature to jump down to say issue 30 of a given title, let me go to a title that'll show this off a little bit. So let's go to Action Comics. Alright, so Action Comics has obviously got over 1,000 issues. Let's say I want to go to issue 300 of Action Comics. Now I could scroll down to get to it, or in this case, I wouldn't use Control J and type in, if I type 300, it's going to take me to the, to the title 300, because that's actually some, a titling comic base at this point. We got a lot of titles. But if I want to go to line 300 of Action Comics, what I do is I hit F3, and which will then jump to which item, and if I put in 300 and go, I immediately go down to issue 300 of Action Comics, of a long title. So F3 if you want to go down to a particular line in the current display. Control J it acts as a shortcut just to get you up to this field right here. So if my cursor was down here and I hit Control J, the cursor just immediately goes right there. So the old Control J beep a barcode behavior works the same as it ever did before. So that's still a thing. Okay, let's see. Intel's working on a CPU with 128 cores. That's going to be awesome. By the way, one of the things we did recently on our back end, on our server, is we installed a version of SQL Server that allows us to get more cores working on different database queries. So you should be seeing our back-end database performance for the things that were database bound. There weren't a lot of them, but there are certain things that were like harder to do. One of the bigger ones was like if you went to Atomic Avenue and you said, give us a list of all the blowout issues, which is for all the issues that people have up for sale, show me the things where their current sale price is less than 50% of their asking price, which is a little bit, it's not the hardest query in the universe, but it took a second or two. I mean, and sometimes it got really bad. Now that the query is reliably under a second to execute, so that's kind of cool. Who can memorize UPCs? Once upon a time, yes, we used to have abbreviations for comics. This is one of the things that went out along the way. Let's see if I've still got that showing. So Oro says, who can memorize UPCs? I use the 4-digit codes with Control J. WDCS equals Walt Disney Comic and Stories. I can Control J, put in 460 without scrolling all the way down. Yeah, the abbreviation thing went away. It was when we first started, and every once in a while I'll sell a really old comic book where we had 3 digits. So like Batman was just BAT, and so if I went to BAT 23, that was Batman issue number 23. That would be his code. That was great when there were 300 issues in ComicBase. Now when we got to a couple thousand issues in ComicBase, then we said, well, this isn't going to work, because we worked all the numbers, and we said, well, we're about to run out of everything. All right, so we went to 4 digits, and if you're 4 digits, this is going to give us enough for a while, right? And it turns out if you start out, and there's a really nice algorithm, it shines with something like Walt Disney's Comics and Stories. So if you enter a new title that says Walt Disney's Comics and Stories, there's 4 letters in it, you say, is WDCS, is that taken? And if Walter Deming's comics and stories hasn't already taken it, then you get WDCS, that's your official abbreviation. It's almost like stock market ticker symbols. It was great while it lasted. And we did all sorts of things to try to make them mnemonic in terms of finding unique abbreviations that still were good. But more and more, as soon as you got Batman the Everything, and there are probably several hundred Batman titles at this point, or G.I. Joe and the Transformers, and suddenly you got 80 different versions of those. Suddenly you went from having really nice, memorable things like G.I.J.T. would be G.I. Joe and the Transformers. Well, if G.I. Joe and the Transformers second series, that became G.I.J. 2, and then it went snowballed from there. It got to the point where by the end of using mnemonic abbreviations, you know, you would have something crazy like, you know, Batman Mark of the Phantom would just be, BJLX or something. It would have nothing to do, the first letter would have something to do with the title, but the rest of it was just nonsense. In the end, we just abandoned it. It didn't scale, and it certainly wasn't going to scale to new things like magazines and comics. So the abbreviations, we preserve them for backward compatibility. If you have a barcoded label, it will try that one last to try to get to it that way, but it was breaking long before we let that one go. So yeah, abbreviations are for backward compatibility only in comic books, but we don't use them going forward. All right. Let's see here. You hear about the guy selling the Ultimate Spider-Man collection. Is that the one where it was like every Spider-Man that ever happened? I think I did hear about that. If so, and Steven says, when you use F3, you have to type in an exact issue number to match. If you if you have on a 300A and 300B, just typing 300 won't find anything. Absolutely true, and that is as designed. Okay, cool. All right, so moving on. And how are we doing? We are running long on time, but I'm going to pick it up. All right, so okay, so basically it comes down to this, guys. Short version. Operating, new operating system, new stuff like that. Let's talk about how to get your stuff moved over to a new machine. All right, you've said, look, my Windows 7 laptop that I've had with its 2 gigs of RAM and its 32-bit version of Windows. All right, I get it, Bickford. I can't keep this one forever. What do I do about it, right? All right, getting COMICBASE over to a new machine, really pretty. So if you start out, go down to Best Buy, wherever the heck you buy your laptops from, and you buy a new laptop. And basically installing COMICBASE is it's easy. First thing you remember though is we don't have your data unless you gave us your data. So unless you saved a copy of your backup on our servers, the default is it's like a letter to grandma or your will or whatever else. Just because you typed it in Microsoft Word doesn't mean that Microsoft has a copy of it, right? We're the same way. Your data is your business as far as we're concerned. We will let you back it up on our servers if you use Sidekick, but if you didn't do that, we don't have your stuff. Okay, so don't come looking to us for it. So your data is going to live by default in a place in your documents folder called Human Computing, COMICBASE Databases, and by default, your data is all in one big file called COMICBASE Database. Now, in my particular case over here, my database, because I deal with different databases all day long, I called my personal inventory Pete's Inventory Database.cbdb. And if I have any doubts about where that lives, I can come under here under COMICBASE Statistics, Collection Statistics. That's the File menu, and then go down to the Collection Statistics, or hit F12, and then click this icon over here. This is the Database Info icon, and what that's going to do, if I pull it over to the right monitor, is it will tell me the exact full path of exactly where this database is living on my machine. So if I ever have any doubts about where that thing lives, that is one way to do it. Another way is if I just want to make a copy of my database on something like a thumb drive or a flash drive, don't even bother where it is right now. Just go under File menu, save a copy, stick in your flash drive, make a copy, you're done. Okay? All right. So, but here's how you install COMICBASE on a new machine. Step 1. Install COMICBASE on the new machine. So go ahead and go to my account, go to your registrations, download the program itself onto your new machine. All right. Step 2, move your database over to the new machine. So if I'm assuming you still have access to your old machine to do this, but just go to your old machine, launch your COMICBASE, do a file, save a copy of your database onto a thumb drive or something like that. I would call it the same thing you did before. And honestly, the best name for anything, unless you've got a reason to not call it that, call it just COMICBASE Database. You don't need to call anything special. That's going to be the name that we look for, by default. Save that onto the thumb drive. Now, important step if you're saving this onto a thumb drive, everyone forgets this and it messes you up, is don't just grab the thumb drive and yank it out of your machine when you're done. Go into My Computer, and let me show you that. So let's go back to, if I go up by here and I say PC, I go this PC. Here it's, whoops, I bring it over to the right monitor. Here it's going to show me all the drives that are hooked onto this machine. All right, I'm going to stick a thumb drive in right now. I think I got room. Yep. All right. Okay, so here is a new thumb drive I just inserted, this guy right here. So let's say I've just copied my COMICBASE database onto here. All right. So I went to this PC, I found my thumb drive, I'm going to right click, and I'm going to choose eject. All right, what eject does is says, look, if there's anything you were thinking about writing to this disk, write it now because I'm about to pull the damn thing out. And usually just because your computer's trying to do some, stuff that's very efficiently, it'll hold stuff in memory until it needs to write to the disk. It tends to write to the disk when it feels like you're not busy doing other things. So make sure you don't have half a file or you don't have parts of your file still hanging open. Hit eject. Once I've done eject, this icon's going to go away. You're going to hear a little sound effect that says bloop bloop. And then I can go ahead and pull the thumb drive out. And now I'm good to go. And we're good to go. And then all I gotta do then is, whoops, that's kind of fun. Okay, I hope we are still live. It says I've lost my internet connection. Okay, looking. It looks okay here. I do not know, guys. Are you still receiving? Because if not, I'm going to have to come back. Oofda. All right. Well, that's kind of fun. Are we live? Let's find out. Content. Live. All right, I hope we're back. Wow, okay. I think we're back. Guys, that was fun. Excellent. All right, so that was kind of cool. So yeah, what happened on my end just then is I got a note from YouTube in the streaming window. It says, you're dead. It basically said everything's gone, and it looked like data was still hitting the server, but then I got some internet glitching, and it was very strange, so we're back now. So, hey, welcome to live TV. So, there we are. I'm glad it worked out. Anyway, I think the last thing I was trying to say before all this, if you use a USB drive, eject it. At that point, just stick it in your new machine, copy it to the same place it was on the old machine, double-click it, COMICBASE will launch, you'll see your data, everything is good. At that point, good idea to install the pictures if you are using the archive edition. You don't need to, but you know you bought the pictures, so I would go ahead and install them. But you install them the same way you did before, as far as going to the file menu, download picture movies. Now there is a way to. I did one thing that was actually halfway smart this time, in that I went out ahead of time and went to the show notes for the YouTube channel, and I included all the resources for everything I intended to talk about right there. So if everything I said was disjointed or weird or left because of an internet glitch, then you can just go ahead and hit the references just from there. And excellent. And sorry. And that is going to get turned off right now. Excellent. So that okay. All right, so anyway, but yes, hit the show notes, and that should be able to tell you everything that we're doing as far as the references. We have a tips and tricks article, which I think is the first thing cited, which is how to move COMICBASE to a new computer. Follow that. It's as easy as pie. Just make sure you're copying the file you think you're copying, eject it cleanly, install COMICBASE, open it on the machine, and again, it's just, don't think of COMICBASE as like a big complicated thing, you're not doing like an SQL server install where you're like 8,000 system files all have to be in the right place, activated and attached and everything to make it work. Think of it like I install Microsoft Word and I'm opening up that letter to grandma that I was using before. The letter to grandma is your COMICBASE database.cbdb file, and all you gotta do is, once you've installed Word, or in this case installed COMICBASE again, just double click and then open that same document again, and you're still back ready to go. And then the next time you open it, it's gonna automatically remember that was the last file you were working with. It'll open it again in the future. So that's the short news on how to do that. All right, last thing I want to talk about before I go is, people do ask a fair amount, is when I buy a new machine, what kind of machine, I'm sick of the old thing, I want to get rid of it, what kind of machine should I buy? My general advice is this. The number one thing you can do to make COMICBASE or any database just absolutely fly on a new machine, get an SSD. So an SSD is a solid-state disk drive. It's a new technology where, instead of using a mechanical platter, so basically a magnetized piece of I don't know if they're aluminum or steel, I think, basically, instead of using magnetic particles on a spinning platter with a little set of heads, wafting microns above it, going tuk 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 as they try to track and find all your data. Instead of that kind of stuff, what it does, it basically uses a form of solid state memory. So it's memory that, once written, it requires an additional charge to lose its state. So once you've written it, unlike RAM, where as soon as you lose the power, you lose what was in the RAM, these ones, if you lose the power, you keep whatever the last memory state was. That's why they're called solid state disk drives. Writing memory, as opposed to moving a physical platter around and writing it that way, infinitely faster. And as a matter of fact, if you have a really modern machine, you can even bypass a lot of the bottlenecks built into what's called the SATA or the PCI bus. Sorry, the SATA bus. And you can go directly into the same part of your computer that feeds like your graphics card. So that's your PCI bus, a PCI Express bus, which can work at just stupid speeds. And so I included some references in the show notes for things that, like, the modest ones will get you 1,000 megabytes per second, write speeds. For like a couple $100 you can get, it's like I want to say it was like $250. I had a reference to one that will do 1,000 megs per second peak writes. And this is comparing to, like, I'll do troubleshooting with sessions with people. The same guy who was having his trouble with his FiOS connection was getting, I want to say, like 1.2, 2.0 megs per second sustained throughput off of his conventional disk drive. When that's happening to you, where the modern alternative is working 500 times faster, or for that matter, if it's working 5 times faster, it's time to get the new thing. And with SSDs in particular, they've come way down. They used to cost a fortune. I mean, it used to be, a terabyte SSD was an unthinkable thing. I mean, they only existed in like college science labs. Now a terabyte SSD is $80. For the cheap ones, or you can get a really, really nice one for like 150 that will absolutely fly. So of all the specs you can ever get on a new computer, the one that will be the life-changing is an SSD. I wouldn't buy a computer that didn't have one, or that I couldn't stick one in instantly. So anyway, that's number one. It used to be that RAM was a big factor for whether your computer ran fast. In my experience these days, it's not so much, because RAM's one of those things where everyone knows the spec, and it's one of those things consumers will always look for. It's like, oh, I need 8 gigs of RAM. RAM's cheap. You can put it in. If they didn't build it into your machine very much, it's easy to buy a couple sticks and stick it in yourself on almost every machine except for maybe a Mac, which they've made impossible to service. But even on Macs, there's usually a way to crack open the secret panel with a special screwdriver and stick more RAM in. But RAM is usually not going to be your bottleneck unless you have just really small amounts. Once you have 8 gigs of RAM, my experience is putting more than 8 gigs in, it makes things a little better, but not really enough that you notice a lot, unless you're doing something very, very heavy duty, or you're doing a lot of things at once. If you've got like one program running at a time and you got 8 gigs of RAM going, honestly, the difference between that and a 16 gig system is modest. And once you've gone 32, at that point you're just showing off. And so you probably noticed I had 32 gigs in mine because what the hell? I always want to have 32 gigs in a machine. Having done it, I'm like, it wasn't all that. Yeah, I never run out of RAM, but at the same time, I never ran out of RAM before. Last spec on a computer that you might look into is your processor speed. COMICBASE is calling for, I believe the specs is something like a 2 gigahertz i3 or better. Honestly, that'll do you. It's faster processors are nicer, but right now processors have gotten so hard to spec in terms of what they do and what generation, what tricks they're doing in order to stay under that thermal performance level, that the clock speed can be very very hard to match up to reality in terms of how it really performs. A lot of things will run at low speeds, when they're under, when they're under heavy power conditions, they'll throttle down, or they'll throttle way up when their thermals are running very well. A lot of times there's multiple cores. It's almost as if you have multiple computers working inside each of the chips working together, and so you can have things with 16 cores, 128 cores, where else. If you want to go absolutely nuts, there's an AMD architecture called Threadripper, which I hear is absolutely badass. That said, look, it'll make Cyberpunk 2077 play as well as Cyberpunk 2077 is ever going to play, but it won't do a lot for COMICBASE. I mean, it'll second here, second there, but it won't change your life. SSD is the big one. Having enough RAM, and I'm going to say enough RAM is 8 gigs. Will do you proud on the whole thing. Beyond that, I would worry about other things. Like I'd worry about, like, do I have a nice monitor to hook it onto? So for instance, don't buy a laptop with just a tiny monitor, especially if your vision is getting to be where a lot of us is, where we need to make things a little bigger in order to see them right. Because if you magnify your screen essentially, and you're starting with a smallish monitor anyways, because having nice small laptops are convenient to carry around, you start having not terribly many pixels to play with, and then things start get a little squished on the screen. So maybe get a little bit bigger monitor, or at the very least have it able so you can hook your computer up to a bigger monitor when you want to do more serious work. But honestly, if you stay within the specs on the minimum monitor size, you'll be okay. But having a 1920 by 1080 monitor is very comfortable. Having a 4K monitor is even better for me, but it requires some desk space, so judge accordingly. But don't get yourself like a 728 pixel monitor, tall, and then magnify it. Otherwise, you'll find that things start not fitting on the screen, and you won't be happy, or you'll be scrolling all day long because you can only see 3 visible lines on the whole thing, and that's not a great combo. But anyway, that's pretty much that. So let me see if we got any other comments just right now, and then let's move on. Let's see. Trinity Steve Levin collection, over 17,000 items. Oh, sweet. This must be the Spider-Man collection. Let's see. Is there a reason I cannot copy and paste a comic UPC into the search field in COMICBASE? Nope. No, you can paste anything you want into there. Make sure you have the current version of COMICBASE. And just make sure that you're copying what you think you're copying. One thing I have noticed, if you have a remote session going in your machine, there's certain things that will disable your clipboard in Windows, and you'll find you can't copy and paste into anything. But no, the UPC, the search field in COMICBASE is just another text field, so it should work fine. All right, and Greg wants to remind everyone, don't forget we have a dedicated thread on the COMICBASE message boards where you can request live stream topics and demos. Excellent. And Rich said, who recently do those reports list come from? If I loaded this week, would that be what is my database? I'm not sure exactly the context of the question on this one. Might be worth following up with support. I'm not sure if I have enough data about what you're referring to go on. If you're saying if I put up a report and it doesn't seem like it shows up on comicbase.com right away, can occasionally be reasons for that. So typically we'll ask people to wait half an hour for the server to make sure it's churned through enough stuff to update your collection. Probably the most common problems we've seen with people having reports that seem out of sync is if by any chance you've started having more than one database going and you're looking at the wrong one, then that can cause trouble. Because remember, The server is always going to identify your database by its database ID. So, you know, if I take Pete's comic base inventory and I copy and I paste it, and I make several copies on my own hard drive, and I call one copy one, they call the second one copy two, the third one copy three. If I upload any of those to the server, as far as the server is concerned, they're the same database because it doesn't know where I've got them on my machine. It doesn't know what file name I've got them on my machine. It actually does try to remember the last file name you gave up, but because you need to be able to move things around onto different disks and into different folders and not have them being treated as completely different database, you know, this is just when you move it around on your local machine. The thing that we use to keep everything straight is called the database ID number. That one, you saw it again, and I'll go to it. You see again under the collection stats, that was the file menu, and then collection statistics, then go to the database icon. This goofy looking number here, and we actually laugh at ourselves a little bit here. This preposterously long number is actually useful because it tells you, what the database is. Any database you've got with the same ID is going to seem like the same thing, and the same thing goes for reporting. So if you uploaded a backup, or if you have a different, a different thing listed in Sidekick with the same ID as a different database on your machine, you know what? As far as we're concerned, we updated your database. So make sure you trim it down. You've only got one database you're working with a known ID, and if for some reason you need to have more than one database going, make sure that they have, make sure you didn't make the second one. If you made the second one by saying new database, we're going to change its ID number. But if you made the second database by copying and pasting, then you're in an ambiguous state. What you'll want to do at that point is go onto each of them, look at them in the COMICBASE statistics over here, and then hit change so that they have different ID numbers. That typically is what's going on when people seem like they're not seeing their data right away. And then every once in a great while, we have a server problem where we're doing some shenanigans on the back end, or something got hosed up and it isn't able to chew through all the pending files. But I believe I looked right before showtime, and everything was ticking along just fine on the back end. So if you're not seeing your data, make sure that you don't have one of those things going on. Okay, that's about it for me, guys. Thank you for sticking through this one. Two more technical glitches than usual in the whole thing, but thank you for hanging out with us. We'll see you next time. And yes, if you do have comments for what you'd like to see in future episodes, please do share them with us. I'm entering a period where I'm going to be heads down working on some stuff that I'm resisting the temptation to tell you all about it right now. It involves some heavy lifting on a lot of ends, on the server end, on the database, and where else. It's going to have some pretty cool impacts when it's done, but I'm not going to tell you about it right now because then it's going to get everyone excited ahead of time, and that's a recipe for madness. But if you see me looking a little bit more haggard than usual in the next couple live streams, that'll be what I've been up to. But hopefully I'll have some news to show you when it's done, and hopefully you guys will think it's cool. So we'll see you on the next one. Thanks again, and we'll see you out there. Bye bye.